My name is Marietje SCHAAKE. I'm a member of the European Parliament with the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats for Europe, from the Netherlands, representing the 66 political party, and besides focusing on foreign affairs, so a little bit focused on the news of Gaddafi's death as well, and international trade issues, I work a lot on Europe's digital agenda and looking at the improvements that can be made, the barriers that can be taken down, to see whether we can do better for our citizens and for our competitive position in the world. And today we're going to talk about open data, which is one of those subjects where I think a lot of opportunity still remains to be taken. Transparency and participation are essential in any democratic system, in democratic government. And we see that the internet has been a driving force to enable the sharing of information on a vast scale, which has led to the widespread expectation of transparent and open governments. And we can answer for ourselves whether we think that this expectation is met in reality. I would say it isn't. Open data makes it possible to hold governments more accountable and to also include people in policy making processes and in decision making under the banner of we govern together. Much of the information that is created in public institutions is financed by taxpayers' money anyway. And this includes information about, for example, the weather, traffic, the economy, education, and also culture. And society should be able to access this public sector information, which citizens and businesses can then reuse in useful ways. And we should try to look for opportunities to enable this sharing and this opening of data more than we currently see. The ability to reuse government information leads to more active participation by citizens in policy making and in public discussions, because people would be able to build applications around public sector information. New insights to old problems can be achieved when databases are combined and analyzed in ways that governments may not have thought of or may not have been able to. Businesses also create and add value to government data by providing or developing useful tools. Overall, it's been estimated by some that the opening up of the European public sector information may lead to around 140 billion euros in economic activity. Figures vary, but at least the expectations of the economic benefits of open data are significant. I recently worked on an opinion on e-government for the Committee on Culture and Education in this Parliament. And in this piece, we highlighted that the extension of the European Public Sector Information Directive should also include cultural and educational sectors, because much of the information created by schools and for schools or universities is publicly funded, but is still very much unavailable to the public. And the same goes for information created in publicly funded libraries, museums, and archives. And we all know the example of Europeana, which will be discussed today, but the goal today is to look at some best practices, some exciting examples, and to have a discussion about what we might aspire to in the future. Our program is ambitious. I'm very, very happy with a great amount and also wonderful diverse set of speakers. I'm very happy that you were willing to come to the European Parliament. Besides all of you, there will be people watching through the live stream and the video that will be made of this event. We've divided the afternoon in two panels, and what I'll do is I'll introduce each speaker before they speak, so that it's fresh to your memory, and I want to make sure that we also have time for discussion. So we'll do that after each panel, and there's also a movie in the middle. So we have a full but exciting program and look forward to the discussions with you. I would now like to give the floor to Nigel Shadbolt, who's a professor of artificial intelligence at the University of Southampton, and he's also the head of the Web and Internet Science Group. He's a director of the Web Science Trust and of the Web Foundation. Both organizations have a common commitment to advance our understanding of the web and promote the web's positive impact on society. And in June of 2009, together with Sir Tim Berners-Lee, he was appointed an information advisor by the Prime Minister to help transform public access to government information. So we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much. transmit, or there we go. Okay. So people who have heard me talk before know I just can't do it without slides for some bizarre reason. So bear with me. These are, and I never trust the local technology, but it looks fine here. Okay, I'm going to tell you briefly about 15 minutes about the UK experience here, what we've learned, what I'd like to kind of impress on people taking this fantastic, powerful new idea forward. Currently, I sit on the UK Public Sector Transparency Board. Previously, we advised the previous government on setting up Tim and I data.gov.uk. And it's the sign of a good idea that it survives contact with an election. Okay? So this was taken forward, expanded by the coalition government. And we are very much on a continuing journey. The principles we set up for ourselves was to, when we were originally commissioned to do this work in 2009, was set up a single portal. But there were other things around it that aren't to do with the technology at all. The public data principles that I'll talk about. That none of this works unless you can provide a continuous flow of data sets. That the key is to use open standards when you publish this stuff. That the premise is if you provide data, then applications will follow. And we'll see examples of that today. And crucially, that you provide a license that is truly open and not your approximation of what you think might be open with a few restrictions here or there. And try, of course, and persuade people who have typically been used to saying no to presume to say yes when they publish their data. And perhaps most importantly, and I'm afraid I have to leave at 5 o'clock prompt to get on the plane to go to Warsaw to the Open Government Data Camp, because a key part of this is building the ecosystem of people, developers, SMEs, enthusiasts and activists who can make this live. Now it can sound great, but it wasn't always this easy. Let me show you this picture. I'm going to get a prompt. The prompt is important. The prompt is quite rare now. It's a tatty copy of our postcode paper. We, in late 2009, assembled in the Guardian newspaper in London and imagined what it would be like if our data was free. And in 2 days, we had a bunch of enthusiasts build the postcode paper. This is a postcode in London, and inside was your neighbourhood crime statistics and your allotments and your timetable for public transport and all sorts of interesting data where you could get your adult education classes, healthcare. The great thing about this is we walked into the cabinet, a cabinet meeting, and put this on, and the ministers passed it around and said, "This looked fine." We said, "Yeah, it's great, isn't it?" And also it's a paper, which was good. You know, they don't have to rely on just the web to get this. This was generated off web material, but you know, even ladies with no broadband, little old ladies with broadband could get hold of this. We said, great, yeah, but 80% of the material in here we obtained illegally. Okay. We have broken licenses, we have not paid for stuff we should have paid for, we actually harvested and scraped other data, and that kind of made them think, how could that be? Okay. So in the last couple of years, of course, lots happened in the UK. Our postcodes, for example, are freely available. Most of this data is now freely available. Incredibly, the crime data is freely available at the level of the street. Some stuff still isn't. We still struggle with transport data across the UK, except in London, interestingly. So we have learnt a lot. We've actually learned that open data works at all scales. States can be active. Regions can lead the way. Cities, as in the case of London, which has actually taken an executive decision to free up its transport data, now embarrasses the rest of the country. Literally, your application stops working as you leave the boundary of London. People go, what? Why can't I see? Why has my app stopped working? The other thing, the ... refers to the fact it's not just states and regions and cities. At Southampton, we have also released our data as open data. And interestingly, in the context of education, we think this is a very powerful concept. And to give you an idea that this is a real concept, it's always a dangerous thing to do, I know, to leave the safety of your of your PowerPoint presentation. But if we were to go to Chrome here and have a look at this is actually one of our open data mashups in Southampton, and this is a map that's provided. A student actually built much of this, and we can see a whole range of features. If I want to look just near my building, the current transportation times in Southampton, actually I can then go and see the actual, if this is live, there's the real-time data of the bus leaving from that area. It's got a device, a QR code, they can put in with my mobile app. Students love this because we also have our timetables for lectures, and they can work out just how late they need to leave their hall of residence, their bed, to get to their lecture, given the times of the trains and buses. But we've done more than that. We've got our academic programs, and you may take one of these programs and look inside it. Statistics, for example, on nursing. And we're having to do this anyway. In more and more, we can see what the accessibility, the breakdown of our students are, qualifications on entry, all sorts of data about destination, first degree, balance, but also our student satisfaction data. Now, this is interesting. This is quite dangerous to do. You're actually saying, okay, here we are. This is what our students think of us in terms of this course, okay? But we believe that this is powerful because we believe that being transparent actually helps people make more informed choices. And in higher education in particular, we have this bizarre market in the UK where you get league tables published from sources you cannot actually access yourself, with provenance that may or may not relate to you, with weightings in your league table, the times higher league table that says Southampton is whatever it is in the league table. And there's no way to get hold of that underlying data and provide an alternative view that rebalances against different weights. So I actually think that one of the drivers for data in this context is to make comparison much fairer. Anyway, that was probably longer than I intended on our example in Southampton, but interested to, if any people is interested in following that through. So, not just citizen states, but also organizations. And to that end, we've been developing nomenclatures, we call them rather grandly ontologies, that actually describe the objects of interest in a university or an educational establishment, and they're very standard. So if we could imagine devising URIs, the technical term for the ways to refer to these things on a web of data, imagine the ability to compare and contrast our courses rather than the rigmarole we currently go through. Okay, back to data.gov.uk. It was a single portal. We developed principles that really do make the difference because they set the tone for how your officials are meant to behave. So the top principle, it's on our data.gov.uk site, that data will be published in a reusable, machine-readable format using open standards. That is the principle. And if people aren't, you can ask them the question, why? To maintain the continuous flow of data, there are over 7,600 data sets on data.gov.uk now. There are many more to go. This is nothing like all of them. Much of this is repeatedly generated month in and month out. But maintaining that flow is crucial. There's not just a fire and forget. That we have been trying to persuade people that there is this, what we call a path to stardom, that even if you only have a PDF file, if you put it on the web, at least with an open license, it's better than being locked away and unavailable. Better if that was a structured format, such as a spreadsheet, even better if it's an open standard. And actually, if we're beginning to use web addressing to point to the key data, even better. And imagine a world in which your educational data linked to your economic data, to your welfare data, to your employment data. And that's the ultimate prize for those of us who work and research this web of linked data. And we have seen that as you make the data, the applications arise. So there's just a couple based on crime data, for example, in the UK. Companies now take an increasing interest in the open data Because with access to monthly crime data, they think, well, why are the premiums the same in all of these postcodes if there's so much variation? And people then say, you know, well, this is terrible. It means the price of my house will get driven down. Or actually what happens is that people get onto their local police and have a much more active engagement around, why is this happening here? Is this an accurate representation of how things really are? Because this data is reported crime. An interesting question is, if you do this, will people stop reporting crime because they worry that the price of their house might go down? I've heard that argument made, but actually the evidence is very much in favour that the net benefits of this massively outweigh the inaccuracies in the data or the worries about fair presentation. Okay, the Open Government Licence. I cannot argue enough that this is a crucial part. The OGL, the Open Government Licence in the UK, there are 3 basic terms in it and 1 restriction. Okay. And that is, there are Creative Commons variants as well. It's probably one of the most important things to take away. Also, I would say there is never one single reason to convince your political masters or your reluctant officials about why you should do this. This is not an exclusive or. This does not, you know, either accountability or citizen engagement or efficiency or more economic value. Any of these arguments has real evidence behind it in the open data movement, and usually what varies from state to state is the preference ranking about which one you consider at the moment to be most important or in your local context to be most interesting. You need to work top down, bottom up and middle out. You cannot just have this go as an activist driven movement. It needs political will. It needs officials in the middle who are willing to understand how to make this happen within the machinery of government. It needs policies. You need to reach out to best practice, of course, and you need to release data that matters. Whilst we say you should presume to publish the data you have, if it's just dusty statistics or little regarded material from the remote fringes of government, it's when it's about spending, it's when it's about crime, it's when it's about health. Those are the data sets. It's when it's about geography that matter. But having said all that, data has a long tail. Remember, the long tail thesis in the economics of the web is that out there are so many people who have a marginal interest in just that weird data set. And if you just take all the examples of all the people, the few groups, the small groups who have an interest in the exotic data, the cultural data, the education data, together that's a huge part, a huge number of people. Okay. So never let pure appetite and demand and quantity trump the fact we should be doing this anyway. And finally, you saw there, key one, master the data hugging excuses. You will hear every kind of reason why this is difficult, and actually I'd refer you, if you can get hold of a presentation I know Andrew Stott is giving in Cambridge tomorrow, in Warsaw tomorrow, on the data hugging excuses. It's really very entertaining to see. We had this great Yes Minister TV series, Sir Humphrey, you know, the civil servant who has every reason why you don't want to do this, and we've heard quite a few of them, but actually taking them on the journey to see there's another way. You've got to engage with developers. It's about applications, not just the data, so you have got to build this ecosystem where you can actually get applications built. Do not worry about mistakes. You will make them, you can learn from them. As I say, cultures change by changing behavior. There's some techie stuff that I'm not sure is appropriate for this audience. We might talk about it in the discussion around how you do this, but I would say that data.gov.uk was not an IT project. It was as much about organizational change as anything else. But if you're going to launch an IT project, I would suggest that people think seriously about the opportunities that derive from using open source solutions. One of the big advantages from using open source systems such as Drupal and MediaWiki is that it has been hacked by every conceivable villain you can think to try and bring it down. Wikipedia, one of the most hacked into software platforms. So the community has made it very resilient over time. You go out and procure your particular system from supplier X, yeah, you better be sure you've done the penetration testing. That's a very expensive part of all of this, but open source often helps in that case. So we often think that open source, open data, open standards go hand in hand. Of course, you don't have to buy your open source, go down the open source route, but we found it helped in the UK. And finally, I'm going to end on challenges. This doesn't work without challenges. You know, where will all of this data reside? Who will provide the underlying infrastructure for it? It will not always be of the quality you want. And how do you drive up quality and performance, quality and precision? And I've said very often, people have heard me say, the great example in the UK is the bus stop data. Where are the bus stops? Well, 18,000 bus stops in the UK aren't where the government thought they were. When it published the data, and it published 360,000 data points for bus stops, 6% of them weren't where they thought they were, okay? Which is not bad. I tell you, that's a good rate of precision for most government data sets. So before we all go, then the question is, how do we improve it? How do we engage the crowd to make our data better? There will be issues around security and privacy. How do you balance the release of information that gradually starts to identify locales and individuals? How do you have those conversations with the data protection people, your information commissioners of various sorts, to make sure the balance is properly struck? And finally, there's a challenge to upgrade ourselves, that actually in a data-intensive culture where governments run on this stuff, we have to do a little bit more to educate ourselves and our children and our people about the power and requirements in data literacy. I think this is literally a new kind of literacy that we've got to think about promoting and encouraging. So that's I'm sorry I've taken a bit longer than 15 minutes, but I just wanted to get that through. So that's my presentation. We just kind of rotate through now, I guess, do we? Yes, splendid. I'm going to hand over.
Thank you very much. That was great. Great introduction, very concrete. Now I would like to give the floor to Bas Kotterink, who is an ICT and policy consultant for TNO, which is an independent research organization in the Netherlands. His expertise and research make an important contribution to the competitiveness of companies and organizations. The organization's research and expertise makes an important contribution to the competitiveness of companies and organizations, to the economy and the quality of society as a whole. Previously, Mr. Kotterink worked on assignments as ICT advisor with the UK government and with multilateral organizations. His areas of interest include e-inclusion and open innovation strategies.
I hope it's going to be bigger than on the screen here. Okay, it's a bit smaller than the version I had originally, but I hope well, it's still readable. Yes, my name is Bas Kotterink. I think the apart from the general introduction, I think the relevant work we're doing at the moment that I'd like to mention is that we're doing for the European Commission, DG INFSO, a project on open web, and in the spirit of stakeholdership. I don't have anything on that here, but I invite everybody who's interested in open data, open web platforms to look at that, because we want to make that an inclusive adventure as well. And it definitely shows the interest in Europe in open data, open standards, and open web platforms. So we're very happy with that. The other thing TNO has done before, and I have to mention it, that sometimes looking into the future does make sense, is that in a study in 2007 already, we had a huge case study on WikiLeaks, And we, at the time, we were just writing it, and we were really enthusiastic about how the radical disruption that it could cause. And then we forgot about it, you know, as reports end on the shelf, until, you know, at some stage we opened the paper and there was this entire case study just all over the news. And so now I tend to read the reports even from others a little bit more carefully than before. But just an idea of the things that we are doing. Now this short presentation is about a study we did for Dutch government on open data, drives and barriers to open government. And it started by the government and everybody else actually noticing that open data was taking off in a big time in the Netherlands. Now this is a small sample, but these are increasingly looking like the web-based services sheets where you have like 200 initiatives that are exploding. I think it would be nice to map the increase in the number of initiatives at the moment. Now, it's taking off everywhere else as well. And then the last example, which is a little bit more dark example of open data, is a New York Times article about data eye in the sky, where the government is looking at computational social science, looking at all the data that is emerging on the web, and seeing how they can learn and study that. So there's two sides to the open data equation, but I think we won't go into that. But that it is a very big item, it is very clear. Now, all this prompted a request by the Ministry of the Interior to look for TNO to do a comparative study of a number of 6 European countries to see where they are in implementing open data strategies. Now, key questions were, what are the kinds of open data strategies that countries are employing? How are they implemented, if they are implemented at all? What is the major influence on take-up? Now, some of the aspects were discussed in I think in Nigel's presentation, so some of these are clearly being confirmed in this study, we'll see that. And, well, what was the impact and what are the lessons learned for the Dutch government? This is a bit small, but now, what is driving open government strategies in the EU? Now, there was a long list of reasons to go into open data. In the countries that we studied, the main objectives were around democracy, transparency, and accountability on the one extreme, which is very much the case of the USA, and on the other side, to improve and make services provision, public services, much more effective than before. And especially Denmark is on that end of the extreme. Much less is law enforcement, although if we look at crime statistics, etc., it is a benefit in some areas. So these are the major goals for governments to be interested. Now, one of the main ways of implementing open government is actually open data. So although there's lofty policies on transparency and open government, and some of which are believed in and are being addressed, but the main practical way that we see is by having a concrete approach to open data, and it's increasingly in strategies, prominent in strategies. Now in the implementation, it focuses on, well, what we all know, the reuse of public service information, pushing that, stimulating that, trying to implement directives, and doing something about internal culture, promoting leadership, promoting all these things that stop you from data hogging, as Nigel was pointing out. Now, every element is being used, from education to legislation, but not yet at a very wide scale. Now, what are the main drivers and barriers of take-up? These, you can, if you can read them, no, I read some of them out because I don't think you can read them. But I think they quite nicely mirror some of the experiences that from the UK that were just mentioned. But what struck us was that really at the top were factors involving culture. So both as a driver and a barrier. Closed government cultures are really a showstopper. And where there is political leadership, like in the UK, things can move very quickly, and in the USA. So it's true, it's not so much about an IT project as it is about just taking action. So I'm not going to go through all the details. I mean, the one that I would like to mention is existing models. Now, for instance, in the Netherlands, quite a bit was invested in to make some of the government agencies more independent and allow them to have their own business models. So they're used to having their own budget and price setting. Now, some of these models, some of these agencies actually have practices that are sort of running counter to open data practices. So it's not that they are against it, but there's quite a big investment to go back and to turn around and to change those models. So I think we can make a convincing case, but we have to invest in these transition costs of existing models, of existing practices. So that is one of the reasons that came up quite frequently as well. Now, many of these can be used as excuses. Now, that we cannot see, but there's two excuses labeled here. I can see it on my... So both the drivers and the barriers are being used as excuses not to do something. So there is not enough political leadership, you know, for instance, in different layers of government. That can be an excuse when we want to do it, but nobody supports us. So any of these arguments are actually, if you're not convinced that it is important, if you don't believe in it, any of these drivers and barriers, you can see them as excuses, and you will see them as excuses. So I think is a great risk of mentioning and trying to point out what all the problems are. So the impacts, we tried desperately to find clear impacts on economics, on more effective government, and there's a lot of anecdotal evidence in smaller case studies, but there's no systemic evidence. And I believe that is something that the Commission is also looking into, doing a lot of small case studies, studying them in depth. But the risk we see is that if we put a lot of time and energy in investigating those case studies, trying to make the cost-benefit case for open data, will probably take a lot of time. And I refer you to the case of open source, without maybe finding any conclusive or convincing answers. We need to study the specific cases, but to know more and to understand how open data works and what benefits it can bring. But it will be difficult to get an empirical confirmation that this is really much better than other models. And that is a warning. I would like to finish with some final thoughts. I mean, we presented the study to the government, and we had lots of discussions. And from those discussions, some of the final thoughts came. And there's some personal views in there as well. So there is definitely a very strong general case. As we all know, there's a strong case for open data, and a strong case for open standards, and a strong case for open source. It's very difficult to specifically prove, as it has been the case in open source, that in a general way or in specific situations, an open source option is better than a closed source system in terms, for instance, of total cost of benefits. But the general case is very clear. Now, the specific cases or cost-benefit analyses are very difficult because of this long tail effect, that the distributed diffuse effects, the wider social benefits. These have always been very difficult, for instance, in open source, to quantify. So I would sort of warn against going too much down that route, and in the meantime waiting for implementations. As I mentioned, from the study we can see that the main drivers are fostering an open culture, promoting leadership, and setting examples, leading by example. Now, I think the example of the UK, what it tells me is that if you just move, if you try and show how it's done, if you get the political leadership behind it, it can really move very quickly. But that's the way to do it. Grow the community, show how it's done, and inspire people, not by endless cost-benefit studies. So to conclude, success with open data, I think may simply require a leap of faith and a few high-profile successful examples and lots and lots of lobbying. So to finalize, I think one very important point that I think I've not yet heard in some of this is that open data is one way for the government to engage in this sort of wider field of growing an open services ecosystem in Europe and abroad. This is a growing economic force, and the government has an angle and something to contribute to that. In the wider European digital agenda, it is very important to promote and to develop a European position on the open web in terms of open web platforms, applications. So I think one way to learn and to understand how that works and how you can get value from that is for governments to participate, and one way to do that is to have an active open data strategy, because it's a key ingredient of that ecosystem. So I'd like to finish with that, and thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much. It's very inspiring. Open culture, open ecosystems, engagement. Margot, I would like to ask you to present. Margot Dor represents ETSI, which is an ICT standards organization from France. ETSI is recognized as an official European standards organization by the European Union, and the organization produces globally applicable standards for information and communication technologies, including fixed, mobile, radio, broadcast, internet, aeronautical, and other areas. It has a global membership of over 700 entities in the US, but also abroad, of which 80% are industry. Margot's major focus is on interoperability issues. And hopefully we can get the system to operate in the most optimal way.
That's the question of interoperability between Mac and
Windows.
Good afternoon to you all. One thing I thought I have a big question mark is I'm not sure who we're talking to. I'd like to know who you are, but you make me curious. I was asked. It's difficult to speak after brilliant minds, in particular because I was asked to talk about obstacles. So bear with me if I'm supposed to be the devil's advocate here, because in fact I'm pretty much convinced that open data is something which is the way forward. If for one reason, I'd like to share this with you. Just as a supply of basic physical infrastructure, power, transport, and telecom is essential to the traditional economy, the supply of basic information infrastructure, i.e. core data set, is essential to the information economy. In other words, there's going to be huge, big, fat pipes, fixed, mobile, plenty of screens, and so forth and so on. And the richness and the power of the information that you're going to put in there will also probably come from crowdsourced mechanism, and open data is probably one. It is likely, and Nigel has a little bit touched upon this with his example in his presentation, it touches about each and every areas that is addressed in the digital agenda that Mariette said. So it's about intelligent cities, because many of the we all know in 2020 80% of the European population will be in city centers, and it's very much an urban also phenomenon. It's about eGov services. It's about transport. Nigel has touched upon this. Mesh up data to move in a more intelligent, fast, documented manner. It's about health and demography. Culture and societal service. I think the focus of today is about culture and educational data. So each and every aspect of our life, be it as citizens, as professionals, at work, at play, etc., is affected by the issue of open data. Each and every aspect of what the digital agenda deals with is affected by this question of open data, which then becomes sort of transversal to many other action points of the digital agenda. It's really about putting information at hand and enabling mashup. Now, Mariette boldly quoted a Graham Vickery where the Digital Assembly came up with a figure of 140 billion, which is a nice figure. The estimates actually is a pretty wide estimate, and everybody's looking for the best economic evidence. 140 billion a year in Europe would be great, and I think we sure look for this with a lot of anticipation. For the time being, let's say it's somewhere between 20 and 140 billion. I will, at the end of this presentation, have a URL on the study Graham Vickery just produced, where he sort of tries to put more evidence behind this. There is something that I find particularly interesting when looking at open data. It's really that it's going from something that's hierarchical to a peer-to-peer system in the society. We talked already about transparency, governance, etc., but it's really about enabling everybody to be both a user and a producer of the information. And this changes very, very much the picture, also in terms of governance. I was in Korea last week, and they asked me to talk about open data in the scope of smart cities. And no, they asked me to talk about smart cities. And because I was talking after people who talk about transport, power, etc., I said, well, I'm going to talk about open data. This will be different. But in Korea and South Korea, when you talk about everybody in the government putting public sector information freely and open available, obviously I did the biggest flop of my career with that sort of information. So it doesn't come naturally that governments will want to put everything open and free and accessible to the citizens, because it does need some kind of political will, democratic culture, and there is some kind of risk-taking. I think we're very lucky, mostly in Europe and in the US, that this is the way it happens. I'm not sure all the regions of the world, for the time being, will embrace the same kind of concept that easily. User provider, because in terms of value chain, it's also very interesting, because it's not a food chain that's sort of linear. It becomes then a circle, because everybody becomes if you consider the production and reuse of the data, then you can see, for example, that the data holders, which are governments or administrations by definition, also become a producer, potentially a reuser, because we see a lot of information from administration XYZ reused by another administration, and so forth and so on. So it sort of changes the picture and the ecosystem. I was asked to talk about obstacles, so here we are. For the time being, there are 4 main obstacles that have also been touched upon by Nigel, so I'm not going to expand that. Nigel and Bas, I'm not going to expand that much. But there is a big obstacle of access to data and the multiple formats of the data. For the time being, best case scenario is that it's core data, machine readable. There are 10 different criteria for what is a set of open data. Sunlight Foundation, I think, gave this 10 criteria. For the time being, when there is data available, which is not a done deal, it can be in PDF, it can be any sorts of weird format that you certainly cannot reuse and mash up without a costly transformation. So access is a big issue. Multiple formats, as I say, and meshing up and reusing data, because that's where the value creation is, does create a number of technical issues in terms of interoperability. This is more what we would be working on in the company where I come from. So there is indeed a big issue of technical interoperability. There is an issue with legal interoperability, because the licensing and pricing conditions do differ very much from one administration to the other, from one country to the other, as well as the regulatory framework for that, which is why the PSI Directive and what the member states will do with it is very much waited for. So in order to have sort of legal harmonization and legal certainty of the status of this data. There are a number of economic issues, as we said, so I'm not going to expand too much on this, but the transition process and the cost of transition for the PSI holders, i.e. the administrations and the governments, is not crystal clear, and it does, in addition to all the cultural barriers, there is a cost attached to it, so it poses some interesting economic questions, as well as how could I say this? Open data is really, there are many opportunities, but potentially there are also many disruptions. A museum to date makes money, maybe partly publicly funded, but does make money with some of the data it holds, with catalogs, with the exhibitions, with the produits dérivés. how do you say this in English? Thank you. Yeah, merchandising or stuff like that. So it's all very good and well to say, okay, from now on, all this data you could input for free because somebody's going to do it better, faster, quicker, bigger. But the fact of the matter is that it poses an economic question, whether we like it or not. And it's not good or bad. It is. So some people who were in this economic model, one way or the other, are disturbed. We had, in the meeting we organized in May in Brussels on this subject, or in the Digital Assembly where we had the privilege of presenting, we had some federation of publishers who have some worries about this, because they think if they have to put the data they reformat and publish free of charge, then their business model is somewhat disrupted. And it's not, I'm not saying this, it's not an opinion I'm setting, it's just a fact. And yes, and the value creation, again, it's very interesting to, it will be very interesting when we can really document where the value creation comes, and when this becomes profitable ecosystems that are that can sort of nurture themselves, which is why in the organization I work for, we are trying to involve as much as possible industry, so that they have a say in that stuff and try to input in order to raise the economic value of it all, in addition to the developers and governments, etc. There are some privacy. It sounds strange to say that there are some privacy concerns because it's public data, but the fact of the matter is that not only the core data, single core data sets, but the meshing up of the data might pose some privacy issues. So it is a concern, and indeed the buy-in by the holders of the information, i.e. the government. What's in it for me is something that always comes back. I think Bas talked about this. So there are social and political issue, if I may say. Okay, the page with all the URLs has disappeared, but I can do it by heart. I don't know the URL, but I can tell you what was on this page. No, the status is that there are a great number of initiatives. Nigel presented Southampton, but there are plenty of initiatives at national, local, regional and city level. In France there are plenty with Rennes, Marseille and others. There are plenty of regions. Regione Piemonte is very active, for example. Also at national level, most European countries, some European countries have started creating their data portal. In France it would be data.fr, in UK data.gov.uk, etc. There will be an issue to link all those data portals. At the European level, the European Commission has just issued a tender to provide a system to data.eu, which will be a portal with all the Commission information. And in that stuff there was, and we have this project Share PSI, we can discuss this in the panel maybe, which tried to address some of the obstacles we've seen. And in this slide that you cannot see, there was some URL to have a one-stop shop information for European open data things, which is ePSI platform, which is a very good site. And a number of reference to the European Commission economic pages of open data, and the study by Graham Vickery, which I just mentioned, in order to leave you some homework. And with this, I thank you very much.
Thank you, Margot. This is a lot of information, I'm sure, just like I'm feeling all these questions coming up, you are too, but we're going to listen to one more presentation, and then we're going to have a discussion on the first presentations. We'll see a film, a short clip, and then we'll do the second panel. So now I would like to invite Richard Swetenham, who works for the European Commission as the head of unit for the unit Access to Information, where he's responsible for the review of the Public Sector Information Directive. And before this job, he was the head of the e-Content and Safer Internet unit in the Digital Content and Cognitive Systems Directorate of the Directorate General for Information Society. It's very accessible titles. He's been dealing with the issue of internet content since the mid-90s, when he drafted the communication on illegal and harmful content. which was followed by the ministerial declaration of the Bonn Conference on Global Information Networks.
Well, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. Is my presentation going to come online? In any case, the Commission has been dealing with public sector information for quite some time. In fact, when I arrived in what is now called DG INFSO back in 1994, we had already done 3 studies on access to public sector information, and in due course, with all of the various procedures and consultations and so on, we have a directive which covers the field of public sector information. In 2003, I think it's fair to say that this was a minority interest. It was not top of most people's political agenda. And we were fortunate at the time that the then Commissioner, Mr. Liikanen, became aware of the interest of public sector information, particularly from an economic viewpoint. The public sector collects a vast amount of information for its own purposes, for which the taxpayer pays, because the public sector still, even today, paid for the work they do. And the degree to which anybody else had access to this and was able to reuse it for other purposes was very variable. And the directive laid down a number of important principles, one of which was that this information should be reusable for both commercial and for non-commercial purposes. Yeah, okay, let's get back to the presentation. The importance of the public sector information has been recognised by the European Council, the heads of state and government. In February, in their conclusions, they specifically referred to the availability of public sector information. Next slide, please. Right, what does the PSI Directive do? Well, it isn't a freedom of information piece of legislation. It builds on the national rules on access to documents. In other words, if it is not accessible under national law, the directive does not come into play. It allows commercial reuse, and because that is very frequently one of the restrictions on reuse of public information is to limit it to non-commercial use only. There is a rule about the amount that can be charged, which is limited to cost recovery plus a reasonable rate of return. And there are rules intended to encourage transparency of the charging and licensing system, to prevent the public body cross-subsidizing, which would mean unfair competition vis-à-vis people in the private sector, and to limit and bring an end to exclusivity, and to give the right to for people to complain, basically. Next slide, please. So what are we looking at now? These basic principles are accepted by everybody. Nobody has tried to take anybody to court to say that the directive is in some way contrary to community law. Nobody in the literature has said it's a bad idea. Nobody in the public consultation, none of the member states. However, there are ways in which the actual implementation of the directive could be improved. And so we're looking at that with the underlying purpose of continuing to ensure the level playing field where these government bodies themselves do indulge in business activities, which is where the problem areas, in fact, tend to arise. There are a number of exceptions to the directive, including the culture and education research sectors. And the aim is now for a Commission decision on the approach at the end of November. Next slide, please. I mentioned the public consultation. We had a very good response, almost 600, which is 15 times higher than the previous one, which was only 2 years previously. So we can see that this has become now a matter of very great interest. We also had a workshop at the Digital Agenda Assembly in June, and that was had the highest number of participants of all of the 24 workshops at that event. Next slide, please. The responses, well, the majority of those who replied said that the underlying principles were fine, but that some improvements were needed. The public sector bodies were less enthusiastic about the idea of these amendments. In any event, the strengthening the way the directive is currently expressed to make it a clear right to reuse all public sector information which is generally accessible without proving a particular need for the access, that this should be incorporated in the directive. Some clarification was asked for on a number of issues, including the very central concept of public tasks. The directive applies to public bodies which are gathering the information as part of their public tasks. There was a call for an obligation to deliver the data in open machine-readable formats. And there are issues about licensing and, of course, about charging. Next slide, please. It's interesting to see what the government themselves are doing. And, well, we've already heard very eloquently from Nigel Shadbolt about what the UK has done. Other countries are moving, and in some cases quite fast. The French plan to have an open data portal by the end of the year, and they are working very hard and putting a lot of pressure on public sector bodies to be ready. That said, there are some people they don't need to put the pressure on because they're already there, which include a number of regions and cities in France who have done open data. In Spain, a very wide-reaching action by the land registry, the Cadastre, which has made all of its data now free of charge, which is a very significant change, because a number of public bodies have until now been charging sometimes very large amounts of money for the data for which there is a market. But of course the problem with charging a large amount of money is well, it may get you some revenue, but it is a very significant barrier to entry to anybody who cannot afford to pay. And the economic studies that have been done show that at the very highest level, this is actually not the best way of approaching things. Although you can, of course, calculate how much money you earn, the accounts of the organisation charging do not show how much money hasn't been earned for the economy as a whole because of all the people who can't afford to pay the very large amounts of money that are sometimes being charged. Although the UK hasn't completely abandoned charging for data, there have been big efforts now, for instance, the Ordnance Survey, the National Mapping Agency, to make the reference data, which is the most widely used by people for applications, for instance, this is now free, and you see lots of maps that people are using and mashups of data which they are using on their websites or in applications for mobile phones. The new approach, and the one which the Commission agrees with, is marginal costs of distribution. well, in practice, the marginal cost of distribution for online is, of course, 0. It's not worth charging for. That would be, I mean, that would make no sense. It would be too much trouble. That in practice means online distribution for the general public for data you already have. You don't have to format specially to be free. There are exceptions, but both the UK and France have now put in rules which make sure that the public body has to justify how it has calculated the charges, and that these are in accordance with general principles of fair competition. Next slide, please. Another thing, data.gov UK, well, we therefore put data.gov.eu. It probably won't be called that when it goes live, but in any case, this is now being run in 2 phases. A commission data portal, which will go live next year, which will give a single point of access to the existing data sets which are out there, many of them very important. Eurostat has over 4,000 data sets. The Publications Office runs Eurlex, the legal database, Cordis, there are a whole range of scientific databases which the Joint Research Centre has put online. But there are other ones which are a little less visible and which we hope to make visible, and joining this all together to make it all reusable and more linkable. And then a pan-European data portal, which means exactly what it says, and where we, with the help of experts, including Nigel Shadbolt, hope to, again, make all of this data easier to find and easier to reuse. Next slide, please. I'll just flag up something that's upcoming quite shortly. A recommendation on digitization. We've mentioned Europeana. This is the single point of access to Europeana's digital heritage, which is online already to a certain extent. The museums, the archives and libraries. We're going to encourage the member states to do more in the field of digitization and to make this accessible through Europeana, and to take action for the preservation of the digital data, which is extremely important, and significant work is needed. It's not enough to digitize. You have to put in place mechanisms and provide for the cost of preservation of the digital data. There will be an open data policy package. I've already mentioned the review of the PSI Directive. This will be accompanied by an overall communication setting out the Commission policy towards open data. And there will be a specific measure, although the full text of that relating to scientific information will be in spring of next year. We're planning a communication and a recommendation to the member states, but the communication at the end of November will already, in a sense, give a foretaste of that. The purpose being to ensure open access to the results of publicly funded scientific information. And I've mentioned the portals. All of this will be part of the open data package at the end of, well, I say, well, all being well at the end of November, but you know that there are sometimes little delays. But our commissioner has this very high on her radar screen. She gave a speech in Warsaw the other day precisely about this. Today there was a video message to the conference that Nigel is going off to, and Carl Bohr in her cabinet also gave a speech about this. So this is something we take very seriously. Next slide, please. I'll just briefly refer to the issue of the exclusion of the cultural sector, because I'm not at liberty to say what the Commissioner is going to ask our colleagues to decide. But obviously, when you hear what we have been doing in the field of the content of museums, archives and libraries, there would be a certain consistency of aligning the rules about reuse with a policy to make digitized content of our cultural heritage as widely available as possible. The main issue is, of course, as always, the money and the organizational consequences. The directive does allow charging at the moment, as I said, and it does include rules for the fair treatment of commercial reusers. In other words, what I'm trying to say there is that being covered by the directive is not such an awful fate, and that needs to be borne in mind. Apart from that, I'll be very interested to hear what other people have to say. Next slide, please. I think we're getting to the end. Things that will not change. The level of protection of individuals with regard to personal data, that is expressly mentioned, something that the directive doesn't cover, in other words, that reuse is not allowed, and also the documents where third parties hold intellectual property rights, which is equally very relevant to the discussion about the cultural sector, or for that matter, the education sector. Next slide, please. Well, that's it. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. What I want to do now is discuss for a short half hour, then show a short video clip, then have two other speakers, and then have another discussion of about 20-25 minutes, if that's okay. Because I want to make sure that Nigel can answer the questions before he has to run off to the plane. So who would like to start with questions? Yes, and please introduce yourself briefly so that Margot knows who.
Okay.
And we all know who you are.
My name is Kai Bullions, and I'm working as a trainee for a member of the S&D group in the Parliament. And I have a question about the licensing issues. I'm using open source software now for over 20 years, and I made a lot of different license models. From the GPL, the Aperture Software Foundation, up to the Creative Commons license, there are so many models which can be used. So I would like to ask, why did you consider to use to establish a new model, open government license, and not use the already existent, like the Creative Commons, for example? I mean, it is very complicated if you want to create applications throughout the European Union, if you have to deal with several license models in every country. So why is it not Creative Commons, for example?
Okay, very simply because the data was held under Crown copyright, and the government lawyers had a history of developing their licensing under Anglo-Saxon case law. It's actually really around the fact that the executing officials, the Office for Public Sector Information, and the group there took a view that actually there were some issues with the timing, getting full, going through the kind of Creative Commons approval process, and that actually there didn't, if we could get a Crown agreement, an agreement that applies to all public sector institutions, it would just be faster to get it deployed through the government system. And our experience has been that prior to having this, we had local government organizations who had all sorts of license variants, didn't know there was a single one to hand. The fact there is an endorsed open government license, some of this is branding, I suspect, made it very easy for them to adapt it. There's a framework behind it. It's not an onerous one, and in some respects, what we observe is it's presented no problems that we know of in terms of its application at this point. It's a no warranty, it's an attribution, it's consistent and compliant with particular commons licenses, and we would want to make that clear. Interestingly, a number of countries are looking to use the OGL because their own constitutional arrangements come down through a similar legal process. So it may sound odd, but it's kind of really a cultural comfort thing, is quite an important thing to point out, I think. But I take your point. I mean, the devil is in open source. I mean, that's a whole another ball game, of course, you know, what you're buying into when you buy into those various open sources ones. But for data, I think we could come up with a number of templates. And if you look at the French license, which I believe was announced yesterday or just a few days ago, it refers to the OGL and has used a lot of the precepts behind it. And so what I'd like to see is that we're rolling out essentially self-similar licenses where governments can. Some governments are happy to take the Creative Commons model, it's clear too. Yep.
Could I just add, I mean, you're perfectly right that there are a lot of open type licenses out there, and it is also a problem for users of data if they are having to deal with several different layers of licenses applying to the data which they're trying to link and to use. And one of the requests that has been made to the Commission is for guidance in the area of licensing, and how can we refuse when people ask us? So that may be something where we will be working in future.
I'm also I'm going to present about Europeana later, but I'm also working for Creative Commons, and I just want to add that this is actually one of the issues which is one of our prime concerns at the moment, that we see these very similar but just not similar licenses arising, and we've had so much confusion created in the marketplace. If you look at different licenses which tend to say the same but aren't the same, that from our perspective, and we're in this game of crafting licenses for almost 10 years now, it is highly advisable to try to standardize on licenses as much as you can, and a national standard just simply doesn't make sense in the internet anymore. And a national standard doesn't make sense if we want to build a European or global data usage space. And these things might look benign and they might look trivial in when you draft them in there, but they will bite you in the end, these little differences which you think you need for cultural differences. So I think there's an urgency to kind of like step over these cultural differences and like really look at what you want to achieve in the long run.
But there's nothing inconsistent between the OGL and the Creative Commons license.
Of course there's something inconsistent. If it were something which didn't have any inconsistencies, then it would be the same license.
What is
the Creative Commons licenses don't know any provisions which go about. I think there's something about unjust representation in there.
No. Oh yes, there's an attribution requirement. You should attribute, and you should not. There's one thing you can't do on the license, which is not attribute, and. Yeah, it's a fully permissive license as far as I understand. I mean, the thing you need to understand, though, is that it's an open license. It will allow you to do anything with the data. And I'd rather have that working in the UK than no license at all. And I'm not going to go, I really do think it's important that if it were possible to come up with unitary license schemes. And there's a framework also behind both Creative Commons and the national one, which is trying to explore these issues. I think Richard's right about that. If we could imagine moving fast to adopt schemes globally, that'd be great. So I just want
to... Just to point out, there's 3 provisions in the license which are not present in the Creative Commons license, which makes it in the end incompatible. For example, that you ensure that the use of the information does not breach the Data Protection Act of 1989. That isn't present in the Creative Commons. In the long run, this kind of like, if every country does that, if data needs to be used in accordance with 27 different data protection acts, then you have a problem in trying to create interoperable systems based on this information.
Understood, but that directive comes down from a European directive, and I think we'd be breaking there'd be an issue. There'd be an issue. Look, we want to get to the same place, absolutely, and I think what is true is that the licensing is one of the most profoundly important things to try and get right. Yeah.
Eric.
Very shortly, the Creative Commons framework has all these variations, and as mentioned before, it's about 10 years old, and the predecessor, the GPL, is 30 years old. So I would be surprised if both the Commission and the UK government are unaware of the flame wars between the different licensing policies that have been around for exactly 30 years, whether the GPL is more free than the BSD license, etc. So everybody that comes into this game new says we all want the same thing, but it just takes a couple of statements back and forth, and you end up in a situation where it's actually not always clear. So for the Commission here, it's clear that there's a need for leadership and thinking in this sphere, so that we get at least a European framework that pulls in everybody in the same direction.
Liv Weisberg from the Federation of European Publishers. Just because I heard this Margot mention something that we said, and I'm not sure I understood what you meant, but did you say that we were not in favor of opening to the... I mean, can you just repeat what you said?
What I said is that in particular, in both meetings, we organized 2 meetings on this to get stakeholders' input. One was in Brussels, well, both were in Brussels. One was in May, and the other one was the workshop in the Digital Assembly. And in both instances, the Federation of European Publishers came with a viewpoint, which was extending the perimeter of the directive, or at least making sure that everything is going to be open, including what was it, cultural and scientific material. They put forward position paper that were pretty much, I wouldn't say against, but drawing the attention of the policymakers to the fact that this would have a pretty disruptive effect on their business model. Was it you who were in the May workshop?
I must say there was different issues, and I think there may have been a misunderstanding, because our position for the cultural sector, we are in favor of the PSI Directive to be open to the cultural sector. One thing is the STM publishers representing scientific, technical and medical publications are a little bit worried, and this is also a question I would have for Mr. Swetenham. When we talk about publicly funded scientific information and the limit with, because we say that we are not going to touch any information that are covered by intellectual property rights, but sometimes the line can be thin. But this is like a case for the STM publishers, but we are representing trade publishers, and for example we have a lot of publishers who are having art books publishing and are very small and very little means, and will be very happy to have an opening, as Mr. Swetenham mentioned, to the cultural sector. So I think it's maybe a confusion between both.
No, I may have sort of caricatured your position, but we did understand, and we did report, and we did minute that the position paper you put forward. So maybe it was not about the cultural sector, but there were some issues with the scientific, technical, etc. publication.
Yeah, and we also mentioned a point that we were worried about governments competing with, for example, law books, and this was like a case I think I made, and this was also something, I'm not sure that Mr. Swetenham mentioned, that you would like to ensure the level playing field where government bodies has business activity, and I would like to know what you exactly meant by this, more precisely.
Well, on that last point, yes, it's already in the directive. The government body, what I call hybrid public bodies, those who are both collecting information and supplying it to reusers, and themselves operating in the same market as those reusers, are currently required to do a number of things, including, first of all, not having exclusive agreements, secondly, a limit to the prices they charge, and most importantly, there is supposed to be no cross-subsidization, that the commercial arm of that organization has to pay the same price as private sector, or anyway, people outside the public sector body, using the information or reusing the information.
Well, I think it's exactly this point that we made last time, because we've been signaled by some law books publishers, for example, that there was some unfair competition on that ground. But I don't want to enter in details.
But it's interesting because that does inspire me to make a point. The reusers complain when the public sector body charges too much. Some of them also complain when the public sector body doesn't charge enough. Because the law book thing, I mean, there are cases where in some countries the public sector has taken over distribution of certain types of legal information, which was previously supplied by the traditional legal publishers, and it makes that product available for free to the to state bodies, and so that means a loss of income to the private sector publishers. But I think that it has to be said that there is an area where governments are entitled to decide that part of their public tasks include making certain types of information available for free.
In the context of interests and lobbying and complex situations, can you, Nigel, maybe share your experience with copyright discussions around open data, if there are any, and how that's played out in your situation in the UK case?
Well, there have been issues. I mean, certainly, interestingly, the UK government's also commissioned an interesting report recently, the Hargraves report, around IP and copyright. And so this is something that people are thinking about a lot. And you know, rights around data. I mean, it really becomes acute in situations where we have existing charging for schemes in various parts of government. So this is to Richard's point. So in the UK, there are parts of our mapping which is still charged for, our land registry, Companies House, Met Office data. There's a good amount, and indeed we're very keen that we understand how to make the case for the maximum release of the maximum amount of open data consistent with the delivery of these services. Now, some of these services, of course, were set up to drive revenue to provide the improved service. And there's this kind of problem at the heart of many of these organizations within government, and actually when it's contracted out. So famously, in the situation where this core piece of digital infrastructure was unintentionally let go into the private sector, and the government's busy buying it back forever and a day. And that balancing between the larger public good and private interests is a really interesting one. One of the interesting arguments I hear being made, and that we look at ourselves, is what pieces of information are currently or likely to be in the future the core reference sets over which governments should seek to maintain some sovereignty, because it's likely to help in the good governance and running of the place at all, and the running of the public services. So you can perfectly happily contract out the service privately, but the data maybe shouldn't, the core reference data shouldn't go with the service. Okay, now can we establish that principle? Is it a reasonable one to look to establish? Because I think then the view would be that we could kind of reset expectations about how we procure. Existing problems in copyright do exist. I mean, they absolutely do exist, and they can be very knotty and not always intended. There are a lot of unintended consequences of procurements that have happened in the past. So it's something that's going to require a lot of work.
I think this is precisely the question that readdressed by the Federation of Publishers is what I try to say in the brief presentation. There is a number of businesses and business models that are going to be disrupted by the open data, whether we like it or not. The other one I can think of is when you hear a lot about data journalism, which is all very well, but and probably the way history is going, but it's very disruptive for newspapers and press and media in general, and this is probably something that needs to be addressed when thinking of which legal framework you adopt for that, because you cannot just write off a number of businesses and say, okay, well, this is the way it's going, and thank you very much, goodbye. You, as a policymaker and parliament, etc., you probably have to take this into account.
Any more questions? I have one other general question. I mean, looking at where we are now, fragmentation in terms of licenses, fragmentation in terms of where different EU member states are, some ahead, some behind. What would be the benefits, if you could mention two each, and what would be the priorities of obstacles to take down to achieve sort of a common European open data space? If we could maybe just start down the line. I mean, I know this is a difficult question, but it helps. I mean, a lot of us here are involved in trying to push this on a political agenda, and we are facing these obstacles. And so, one, what are the benefits? Two, how are we going to get there? Would sort of be the question from the EU level, which is, of course, where we concentrate our.
Well, it's not only a difficult question, I think it's also a tremendous challenge, because one of the things we did in the study was compare European situation with, for instance, the US situation. And I mean, the examples that are given about how difficult it is to ensure that there's not too much disruption, given that we have 27 member states with each their own legislations and histories and cultures, to get a harmonized model without fast enough to make sure that we reach a competitive open data environment that also propels our other open economic activities that we now want to dive into, I think is going to take time. So to do fast, to move fast, and to be perhaps a little bit bold in saying, like, well, I know you all have your national licenses, but we're going to implement one that's better, and it's going to be uniform. It's going to make sure that in a few years we catch up a little bit, perhaps on for instance, what's already possible in the US. I mean, some have said, and it's also being disputed, but that a little bit of the culture and the legislative framework in the US helps them to potentially have more value, to derive more value from open data than in Europe. Although we have so much, I mean, Europe has so much richness, also culturally, that is an extreme opportunity. But we do need to put our foot down a little bit, and this is my sort of bold view on this.
Well, I'd say, I mean, there is a clear movement going on now. There is momentum, and at European level we can try and help that go forward. And what I've indicated to you that the Commission is planning to do, we hope it will give an added push with a communication with the various areas in which we're involved, including as a funding agency for scientific information, where we can actually require contractually certain things to be done, and then with a proposal for one or two modest tweaks of our nice directive.
I think that's exactly a very promising way to go. I think in terms of how you incentivize, as I was saying, there's no high royal road to this, and I think at different times in the political cycle, different things matter. At a time of fiscal constraint, people worry about where the money's going, or what money's being spent on what. So you can often pick a an area which is particularly ripe for fast progress. In terms of what you can do fastest, I think there is really something to be said for looking at some of these core reference sets. And we're not now, I mean, it's hard enough. You think what's happening with the PSI Directive and the complexities there, and people just trying to get location geospatial standards organized. But something much more simple. So open standards for company names throughout Europe. Okay, just or open simple schemes to name and label the stuff in our digital governance space, from schools to roads to hospitals. That these are not, the URIs are the building blocks for much of this. It may sound very technical, but it's the thing that allows us to meaningfully link information together. And to the first point, I think we should be bold about imagining we can build a digital infrastructure that isn't about fat pipes and it isn't about huge amounts of investment. It's about sitting down and coming up with some lightweight standards to allow data to be connected.
So in terms of benefits, there is indeed this value creation in particular if, we're not sure yet how and how much, but in particular because the economic agents involved in this value creation are very often SMEs and very small companies, very creative developers, etc. So it's not like a big boys game, if I may say. It's very much about the SMEs, which in Europe I think is important. The second benefit is obviously this empowering, this different model that I call peer-to-peer society. I think this is a massive transformation of the political, social model we live in, where there's not a top-down thing, but it's more really a meshed peer-to-peer society, right, left, up, down, and so forth and so on. And I think it bears a number of social transformation that we don't even see the surface of yet. In terms of the how, I will boldly shelter behind the findings of the work we've done so far, which seems to indicate that there won't be a D-Day of open data where suddenly everything is going to become open and as it should be, etc. But it's more going to be incremental and proving the movement while walking. I'm not sure if you say it that way in English, but it will show, it'll prove, and then and gradually the movement is going to build by showing the benefits of those applications and reusing what exists and benefiting from experience. That's what we found out in the work we've been doing so far. Just prove it, and it's the benefit.
Well, on that note, I would want to thank the first four speakers very, very much for their contributions. We're now going to look at a short clip to get more information and refresh our minds a little bit, and then we're going to go to the final two speakers and a final round of discussion. So whoever needs to go, Nigel, I think you may want to. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you again and continue to work on this subject.
Transportation is a natural place for open data efforts to take root in cities because transportation touches everybody's lives every day. It's how we get around town, it's how we get from home to work.
So think about all the different ways that you can find out whether it's going to rain that day or what the temperature is going to be the next day. You can get it on TV, on the radio, on the internet, you can get it on your smartphone, and you never have to pay for it. And the reason that that's true is because the National Weather Service is open. Transit agencies have been very hesitant to share that information with third parties. They've always felt like they have to be the primary source of information for riders. But if you take the model of the National Weather Service and you apply it to transit agencies, you realize that you can have just as many options to get transit information as you do to get weather information. And the beauty of it is that it's no cost for the transit agencies. So we opened up our data and we've started sharing it with developers, and within hours of sharing that data, developers had taken it and built iPhone applications, websites, phone numbers, text messaging services that allow our riders to know where their bus is and when it's going to pick them up.
All of the events that we've seen in transportation open data recently plug into a larger conversation that's happening in the country about government 2.0. One of the most vocal proponents of this is Tim O'Reilly, who talks about government as a platform.
Gov 2.0 is the use of Web 2.0 technologies like cloud computing, social media, open data by government. Government should think of itself as the platform that society builds on, rather than government as a vending machine of actual service delivery. The idea of being a platform provider is you do the least possible, not the most possible, to enable others to build on what you do. In this transportation space, it has to do with thinking about what steps can be taken that will then let private individuals, private companies, actually deliver additional services to the public.
We're at JP Licks, which is a great ice cream store and coffee shop in the heart of Jamaica Plain. Right out front, the 39 bus goes by inbound and outbound. And what we have here today is we have the LED sign that a third-party developer installed at JP Licks that tells you when the next bus is going to go by in each direction. We now know that we have 2 minutes until the next bus is going to come.
One of the most popular apps for bus riders here in Boston is an app called Catch the Bus. You click on the app and it loads for you a list of all the routes. We're taking the 39 outbound, and there it is. It tells you the next bus is going to come in 8 minutes. Buses are always more confusing than trains because there's not a track there. It's not as obvious. When you see it on an app like this and you can interact with it, it makes the bus something real and something really easy to understand.
Transit agencies traditionally think that it's always their responsibility to get this information out, and it can be a big hurdle because of the organizational challenges and the financial challenges that we face. It's nice to have a team of literally hundreds of developers out there who are thinking about these questions.
Up until recently, the MTA in New York was the largest transit agency that did not publish open data.
Last year, the way you got data from the MTA was you either went onto their website and through a process of what's called scraping, tried to take it off and put it into a useful format, or you submitted a FOIL request and you got a CD and you don't know if that data was up to date, and the format of the data on that CD was hard to use and undocumented.
And over the past few months, that's changed. In January, they launched a developer center and an open data program, and recently they had their first developers conference.
The Unconference is really about harnessing the power of applications developers. The MTA has for too long really pushed the development community away. And this conference today is really about embracing the development community, about finding ways to be able to work with them, and about allowing them to bring the type of creativity and innovation that they've brought into so many other areas into our transit system as well.
It's a night and day difference from last year when developers were being sued for using this data to this year where the MTA is encouraging developers to use this data.
Public transit is just a piece of the urban transportation network. There's incredibly interesting data being produced by all sorts of other modes, including private cars.
In cars, there's a whole bunch of data that's being generated that is now going into the wind, is uncollected. And today we could be providing that information. Imagine how much innovation we would get if there were an open black box in cars. So car sharing would be one application. Better routing would be another. Tell me how good a driver I am, what my fuel efficiency is would be another one. There's a whole number of applications that I can think of some, but more to the point, there are thousands of people out there who could think up tens of thousands more.
Open data can even be used to help us make our streets safer.
It is imperative that moving forward we have more information about the extent of the traffic safety problem in New York City. Right now the public thinks that injuries and fatalities on New York City streets are isolated accidents. With more open and timely information about these crashes, it will be much easier to show everyone that these are preventable tragedies that are occurring and that there are clusters of these tragedies that are occurring precisely on streets that need better enforcement and better street design.
The fact of the matter is, when the data is public, really smart people who want to take it and make an application can do so. And then I think, by definition, force government to be more efficient.
And when you think of government as a platform rather than as a service provider, then what you are doing is you're creating the capabilities for the people to say, we did it ourselves.
All right, thank you. I'm now very happy to introduce Paul Keller who's the vice chairman of Kennisland, Knowledge Land, a Dutch organization which contributes to making a smarter Dutch society. He manages the Kennis copyright team, knowledge copyright team, where he initiates new projects, advises governments, cultural heritage institutions and other organizations on open approaches to copyright policy, new media and innovation strategies. Go ahead, Paul.
Okay, so yes, that's what I do. Today I've been asked by Europeana. Europeana was invited here, and none of the Europeana people could make it here because they are all over the place. And they asked me to speak on behalf of Europeana. As Knowledge Land, we're working together with Europeana on developing a licensing framework for the cultural heritage data, which is aggregated by Europeana. I guess Europeana doesn't really need a lot of introduction. Richard mentioned it. It's supposed to become the single point of access to Europe's digital heritage. It just got a new website. It's still in beta. It's got about 20 million or information about 20 million objects in it, and it's rapidly growing. Europeana has a strategic plan which revolves around 4 basic pillars, and the first one is to aggregate. That's like the basis underlying thing. Get the information about these objects from cultural heritage organizations across Europe. Bring them together, standardize the formats, make them talk to each other, and so forth, which is the basis for all the other aspects of that strategy. The second part is to facilitate, which is basically providing services and opportunities to European cultural heritage organizations. The third one is to distribute the stuff, which it's collected, so make it available through as many channels as possible. And the fourth one, very important, is also to engage users, to open up new channels with users, to engage with cultural heritage material, to use it in different contexts, and so forth. What I'm going to focus today is the approach Europeana has taken towards the data it collects from the contributing organizations. And that is something, where I hope it stays. That is something where we actually think we're leading by example, and where we are involved in a little bit of standard settings ourselves. Cultural heritage data in Europeana, as I mentioned before, Europeana aggregates at the moment metadata, descriptive information about artworks, and previews small representations of these works, which relate to more than 20 million digital objects, which are held by more than 400 different organizations online. This collection of data is used to provide access to the digital objects that are made available online by these very organizations. So Europeana is, in one aspect, not very much more than a search engine. It tries to drive traffic to the websites and platforms offered by national aggregators, by national portals, by individual cultural heritage organizations. So the principle is to bring users to these places which they wouldn't find. If I'm a Norwegian internet user looking for something, the likelihood that I'm searching within web interfaces of Spanish websites is very, very low. If Europeana brings this together, the likelihood, if these websites in Spain contain something which is relevant to me, which is interesting to me, increases dramatically. So it's also good for actually enabling like cultural exchange between Europeans in the last time. In order to achieve these strategic objectives that we have as Europeana, we realized at some point that we can not only run a website which brings together this stuff, we need to push the data where the data is most likely to be used. That includes a strong focus on an API which produces access to this information which is stored in Europeana for everybody who wants to build a mobile application or whatever, and which also includes a strong embracing of the emerging linked open data movement. Unfortunately, right now, at the moment where we're speaking, is the conditions under which the data provided to Europeana limit us in what we can do. Basically, it's very similar to a Creative Commons attribution non-commercial share-alike license, which and the main restriction in there is this non-commercial, which might sound nice, like you don't want those evil commercial entities go and do all kinds of negative, bad things to your data. But when you look at it in detail, it means quite a lot. We cannot publish Europeana data as linked open data. Within the linked open data movement, it's generally assumed that data isn't really open if it's restricted to certain types of use, and a restriction to only non-commercial uses is a restriction in use. We cannot open our API to all the people who contribute data to Europeana, because some of them, like INA in France, for example, are entities which also engage in commercial activities. So we can't open the API to them because we have gotten this data with the restriction on that it can only be used for commercial, for non-commercial uses. We cannot allow the use of our API by commercial companies, even commercial companies which generate income to our partners. I mean, there's lots of innovative businesses out there which actually drive traffic to cultural heritage organizations, which help them obtain new groups of visitors, of people interested in their collections. All that's not possible right now. Important thing, we can't share our data with Wikipedia, because Wikipedia says we only take really free and open data, and there is a lot of overlap between the information held by all these cultural heritage organizations and the amazing information about this stuff which is available on Europeana. What have we done about this? We've spent the last 1.5 years trying to convince the data providers in Europeana, and as I mentioned, that is more than 400. We don't even actually know the exact number because it's an aggregation model, and sometimes we link to someone who might have a number of their own providers which we don't even know. We try to engage with as many of them and see if we could get rid of these restrictions which make it so difficult for us. We run a consultation process which basically focused pretty quickly on trying to identify perceived risks of making data as openly available as possible. And I don't run you through all of these. I make this presentation available online, and you can look at them. They're all pretty obvious. And we also looked at the rewards, and you see a lot, like most of them mirror each other. Like what's perceived as a risk is perceived as a reward in a different way of looking at it. And anyway, after 1.5 years of drafting new approaches to like the agreement under which Europeana gets the data, and this consultation process, we've come with this huge network of data providers to a number of fairly remarkable conclusions. If you imagine where we started from, where it was basically, yeah, we give you the data because the European Commission wants us to work with Europeana, but we don't want anybody to do anything with it. We're now at a moment where people really embrace, or large parts of the organizations working with Europeana really embrace these open data principles. So one of the main conclusion basically is that the benefits of open sharing and open distribution outweigh the risks of open sharing and open distribution. And this is quite remarkable if you look back at where we started. Based on this basic realization, Europeana felt confident enough to say that we will remove all the restrictions, including the one on commercial use, from the next version of its data exchange agreement, so that the data can be published under CC0. CC0 is a tool by Creative Commons which basically says there are no restrictions in the reuse of this data. It isn't even attribution, so it's basically dedicating the stuff to the public domain. Europeana will also publish guidelines for metadata reuse that address quite difficult questions around attribution and data quality, where we realized like these ones can't be solved by applying conditions on them, because we're actually not sure how this will behave in the future. So we'd rather work on a model of guidelines where we request people to follow certain guidelines. And there will be a transition period from the current situation, which I described in the beginning, where the data cannot be used for all the things I crossed out on those slides, towards this new situation where it can be used for pretty much for everything, not pretty much everything, that runs from since September when this new data exchange agreement was published, and this transition period will end in June 2012, and after that Europeana will publish all the descriptive metadata it aggregates under these open conditions. So we have this new data exchange agreement which basically stipulates that everything Europeana aggregates which is descriptive metadata will be published under CC0. Looking back, this is, I don't know how familiar people in this room are with this. There's been, like last year, a report, The New Renaissance, which looked kind of like at the conditions of how access to cultural heritage in the digital environment should be structured in Europe. And one of the key recommendations of this report was that metadata related to digitized objects produced by the cultural institutions should be widely and freely available for reuse. So in a little bit less than 2 years, we actually think we've managed to implement one of these key recommendations, like by a consensus-based process which tries to convince people of the advantages of this, and where you say at some point you also take a cutoff thing and say like the majority here believes in that this is the biggest benefit in going forward in this open approach, and henceforth, if you want to work with Europeana, you will need to adopt to these new rules of the game. So we're pretty satisfied with that. There's one next step, obviously, is generally people don't use Europeana for the data which describes the object. They want to have access to the actual content within Europeana, which is a much more difficult situation, mainly induced by copyright. Right now, the majority of the content in Europeana is constituted by material that is in the public domain, because that can be made available freely without restrictions. And we will focus on trying to get this material labeled appropriately so that reusers actually know that they can freely reuse this. This is something Europeana has also published a public domain charter about 2 years ago. With regards to material where the copyright is owned by the contributing cultural heritage institutions, we will start to push for these organizations using open content licenses like the Creative Commons licenses to label it for reuse. Our aim is that material in there which is publicly owned should be at least available for educational reuse and for private personal reuse. And something which isn't really directly related to here, but to this discussion here, but worth pointing out all the time, if we really want to get the full richness of Europe's cultural heritage material into Europeana and online, we also need to work on mechanisms for rights clearance. Right now, it's extremely difficult for cultural heritage organizations to figure out what they can publish online, to get permission from rights holders who may not be known, the orphan works problem, or from other rights holders to actually make material online, even for non-commercial reusers. One last slide quickly on what we think about the Public Sector Information Directive. Obviously, what we're showing here is that metadata, which is produced and owned by publicly financed institutions, is public sector information and should fall under the Public Sector Information Directive. Our, I guess, stronger, more normative position is that it should be available without any restrictions on reuse. That's what we're implementing within Europeana. With content which is held by these cultural heritage organizations, the situation, of course, is much more difficult due to copyright, was mentioned here before. Obviously, content that is free from rights, or where the rights are owned by these publicly funded institutions, should also be included in the Public Sector Information Directive or a similar instrument. All other content doesn't really qualify as public sector information, even if it's held by publicly funded cultural heritage institution. If it's copyrighted by a third party, that's a big headache for these organizations, because generally they can't decide what to do with it, and it won't solve the problem by forcing them to follow standards laid out by some kind of directive in this thing. Okay, I hope that gives a very quick overview of what we're doing at Europeana. That's
Thank you very much. I was also involved with the Europeana report here in the Parliament, so it's really nice to hear your side of that experience. I would now like to introduce Willem van Valkenburg, who works on open courseware at the Technical University of Delft in the Netherlands. He received his master's degree from Delft University and he wrote his thesis on the implementation of e-learning systems within corporate environments. He focused on bridging the gap between the end users and the information communication technologies themselves. He's now returned to Delft as an e-learning consultant, and he's contributed to the Delft University's success in becoming a world leader in open courseware.
Thanks for the introduction. I'm not here as a representative of Delft. I'm here as a representative of the Open Courseware Consortium. This is already told, a little outdated what Marietje told. I'm now only doing open courseware and 3 different things, and one is the assistant to the president of the Open Courseware Consortium. The Open Courseware Consortium is a worldwide consortium. We have now about 260 members worldwide of institutions that share their courses online. And we have now more than 14,000 courses online. So that's already quite some content. In Europe, big universities like the Open University UK, Paris Tech. In Spain, there are 40 universities already sharing their courses online, and of course in the Netherlands, Delft. First of all, yeah, we're talking about open today, and yeah, some clarification because I don't know if you're all familiar with the education field. So we have open. Now we all know what that is. And we have open license. We already had some discussion about that, and then we have open courseware, and that's a shareable course material. So it's in the form of a course, as the same way as a student will get it at the university. And we have open educational resources, and that's a shareable learning material. So that can be part of a course, but it can also be other materials. In my presentation, I will talk about OER, the broader term. So why OER? We made a nice list of 7, I think, arguments why you should publish your content as open educational resources. And I will go into detail now. First of all, education is sharing. I think that's one of the most important things. The whole principle of education is that you share your knowledge with others. And until now, mostly it was done within the institution, within the class even. The teacher is telling the students what they should know and how to learn, and they learn from that. And that's great. And but we can transfer that knowledge to much broader than just the university. You also see that students more and more are sharing with teachers because developments are going faster than used to be, and a lot of students are more up to date with certain new developments than instructors. And the great thing is that knowledge is magical. You can give it away for free. And but if you talk about educational sharing, it also means adapting and editing, and because it has to suit the class you're doing, then we have the problem of the copyright. And most copyrights prohibit the sharing, the editing, the adapting of course content. Of course, we already talked about Creative Commons, and I think that's a great solution to it. But more and more material has to be published with that license, and it's going that way. The other one is buy one get one. I think most universities in Europe are publicly funded, and that means that the public is paying for the materials that are created. And why shouldn't the public get access to it? Interesting thing is with research. If you look at research that's numbers from the States, that publisher make about 2% of the total investment of a research, and then they take full copyright of it, and you have to pay to access the content. That's wrong. The public who paid for it has no access, and I think we should really do something about it. The quote of the consortium is that all taxpayer-funded educational resources should be OER. And interesting is that this week, Princeton University in the United States announced that they prohibited their staff members to give away their copyright of content. And I think that's a great step to do. And I hope that a lot of other universities will follow that lead. And then there's the paradox of free. The thing is that won't people stop paying for course materials or books if they're free? And we have some research from David Wiley that that isn't the case. He did research at Brigham Young University, and that over 2% of people who access open online courses at our university became paying customers, so they become students. And you also see that if you give away free online books, it correlates strong with print books. So if the book is really good, people still buy the book. And there are even for-profit businesses that make money with CC licensed and on textbooks. So you can still make money even if the content is open. And a great example is the $5 textbook. It's in the States. I haven't seen good examples in Europe yet. They lowered the price for a book. Normal prices were between $150 to $200 per book that a school had to pay. The new prices are about $45, but there are even lower ones. And you can, what they notice is that schools decided not to spend less money on it, but they spent the same amount of money, but they can replace the book every year, and students can really use the book, so they can make notes in the book, and they get better results in the classes. And another one is the continuous improvements. As what they say, almost every industry gathers and uses data more effectively than the educational sector, and that's a problem we have, and hopefully with OER we can help that. But there's some questions we think the CAT could improve the classes. Which students need most help? What's the least effective part of the curriculum? More questions like that. And now we have the data because it's all digital, but because it's all copyrighted material, we can't fix it. So we know now that we have a problem in certain parts, but we can't change the content and update it and improve it. And openness can give us permission to make changes and make the improvements, so it will raise the quality of education. Sixth one is content is infrastructure. I think that's the key message of the video we just saw, is that if we provide more data and make data publicly available, new things will develop, and new initiatives will come up, and we already are seeing some very interesting stuff online with the open data of the consortium. Examples here are Open Study. It's a platform where students or anyone can ask questions, and you can include it as your institution within your open courses. And the interesting thing is that 70% of all questions are answered within 5 minutes. That's amazing stuff. Another one are the universities, the University of the People, or OER universities, that are creating curriculum based on OER. And as long as you don't want a degree, you don't pay for it. Only if you really want a degree, you have to pay for it. And the fourth one is the Mozilla badges. If you don't know it, look it up. It's real interesting, especially in the third world countries where people can't go to official institutions, universities, but they can do open courses, and with the badges they can show that they've done some courses, and that can help them improve and get a better job. And the last thing is do the right thing. Consider our responsibility and what kind of ethical moral responsibility do we have, and who are you accountable to? And I think that's an important question. So that's in 10 minutes overview and then some slides. If you want to know more, the presentation is already online on slideshow, and more content is on different websites. And of course, I have to show this slide with the references.
Thank you. Fascinating. I'm going to hold back and ask whether anyone has questions. Yes. Please also introduce yourself.
We as Delft, then I switched to my own university. Oh yeah, sorry. There are no obstacles. You can do it if you want to. There are people who don't want to do it, and especially instructors, the teachers, are reluctant in the beginning. But also for them, we can make a very clear case now, and we see at our university that people want to go online and want to publish their courses online. And you see that more and more because everyone is getting aware. That's interesting. And I think the interesting part is that most teachers at our university are primarily researchers. And they get their papers published and can show them what kind of research they do. And with this open education, they can also show what kind of education they are doing and get recognition for their education.
Then I would like to ask two questions, sort of more on a bit of the horizon. You know, where are we? We've heard about the United States. Some people say open data is definitely much quicker there. There's one single public or market space, not 27 different systems as we know in the EU, or sometimes even more when it comes to rights management and licensing, as we've learned. You know, as we are here sort of highly interested in this subject, myself trying to push it on the political level, Paul, I wanted to ask you, you know, are we moving ahead quickly enough, and how does it compare to the speed of the commercial actors in this field? And what will happen if we don't move quickly enough? Not so much, I mean, what would be the opportunities lost for people in Europe, but also what is the impact on our competitive position in the world?
Well, maybe start with a little anecdote. If you look at Europeana, basically the raison d'être is the Google Books project. When Google first announced it, like a couple of European governments came together and said, like, we can't have the Americans basically scan our cultural heritage. We need to do something ourselves. And for a long time, it looked like this was moving much faster in America with the settlement, but the settlement being blown out of the water, basically. What happened then is that a bunch of public librarians in the US came to Europeana and said, we're really interested in what you guys are doing, and you're having a lead in this. We've had 2 meetings with them now, trying to explain them the approach we've taken. So there definitely is if you're bold enough, and if you're not going for the little step, let's try it a little bit open first, or let's try it in a limited context. But if you're bold enough, which Europeana, I guess, is in some way saying we work without restrictions, we work on either you're subscribing to this or you're not working with us approach, and you're saying we do this for 27 different countries, then there is the opportunity to leap forward even over things which look like going on much faster. And I guess that is something which well, in the culture heritage sector, it looks like we are leading at the moment in this, at least when it comes to public projects in this thing. I don't know in how far we can really outcompete commercial initiatives in this thing, but I don't know if it's necessarily competition is the right mode. It's more like what was presented in the video, where government or the public infrastructure really provides a platform for both citizen initiatives, commercial initiatives, other public initiatives, where you provide a level playing field. And in the end, like the more stuff to play with is out there, the more economic activity will arise out of that, if we're right about this. And I think we need to push this a little bit more, and it will create opportunities in this thing. And really look at ourselves and see what can our ambitions be, and how can we quickly realize them, and we can work as quick as anybody else, I guess.
Yeah, what you see now is that the states started with open education, I would say, with MIT in 2001, and they have a big leap forward now, but that's also because the government there is investing a lot of money in it. Obama just recently announced that he will invest, I think, $2 billion in open educational resources. In other countries where you see that the government is spending money and does have a national policy on OER, you see that they're making big steps forward. You see that in South Korea, in China, in Turkey, in Spain. But that's if you look in Europe, I think only Spain and the UK have a real a national policy around OER, and that's holding us back. It's now individual institutions who are publishing content and starting the way. But what I noticed in the UK is that the project I had there is that it worked like an accelerator. So it just helped all the universities to start up, and then although the project has ended, they all continue and improve it and publish more content.
Great. Any other questions? No? I have one more question. What could these mechanisms mean for developing economies? Access to education. Some people warn that if you don't have access to the internet, then the gap between those who have access to knowledge and culture and those who don't becomes bigger. Or could this be sort of a leap forward in that sense as well, where people who would previously not have access to the highest level of education or education at all could somehow get this now? Is this part of the thinking about these open networks, or is it more of a Eurocentric and Western-centric movement?
No, we're definitely looking at the third world. I have an example of Delft. We are known of our water management, And we're doing projects with universities in Indonesia and a couple in Africa, where they're using our open courses to educate people on the water. And they improving the courses with local cases, and that also improves our own education. So we're both benefiting from it, and they get better water management education, and we also improve our courses.
I guess the key in that is really like that. If it's really open, it allows this kind of customization, right? It's not about giving it away for free. It's about giving it away in an open fashion, which allows you to take something which, of course, if it comes from a European university or European school, is probably highly infused with like a Eurocentric view of the world. But that openness allows you to correct for that if that's necessary and if that helps. And in that sense, like that is the key advantage of open over free, if you want.
Yeah, no, definitely. Although access is still an issue and something that we should foster both in Europe, I think, and outside. Paul, maybe you could say a few words also about the cultural diversity of Europe. Now it's being digitized to be opened, to be made available. Part of the discussion here in the European Parliament, whether it is about copyright reform or whether it's about digitizing content, is always that there might be a risk. This is what people warn for, that opening up cultural content too much might somehow compromise this diversity. I'm interested in your views on this, but also in if you have any sort of remarkable facts that you found. For example, I learned recently that a band from the Netherlands, which I like very much, or it's actually a singer called Pete Philly, has a huge following in Japan. You know, who knew? Sometimes these new audiences are discovered. This also happens to be a band who gives away their songs for free to their fan base to be downloaded and distributed, to set trends and to make sure that their audience feels appreciated and involved in the work that they're making. Are there any interesting things you can say already about, you know, new audiences, new collaborations, and do you see a risk for cultural diversity, or is this a bit of a myth?
Well, first of all, I really can't answer that on behalf of Europeana because I only work with them on the fairly limited licensing things. I mean, I know tons of similar examples like what you just mentioned, but I think it is a bit like in the end that opening up is a risk for cultural diversity is a bit of a myth. Because like if you look at this, like the real risk for cultural artifacts is obscurity, and it's not like the fact that they are too popular or that they are done. So opening up basically, it doesn't solve anything, but I simply don't see and understand how that could be detrimental. In the end, if it isn't open, it's less findable, and you might be preserving a status quo, but you're certainly not doing your best in terms of trying to change something to the positive. I mean, there's always, if there's a potential for change to the positive, of course there's the change to the negative as well, but the answer to this cannot be like saying let's preserve the status quo as it is and be happy with it.
I think that's a very good end to a fascinating discussion with a lot of facts about open systems, open knowledge sharing, collaborative decision making, policy making, viewing government in the first place as a platform upon which citizens and others can build instead of a limiting or fragmenting entity, or as it was called, service provider. I've learned a lot today, and I wanted to thank all the speakers for their very, very concise but very valuable contributions, and also for making them available. I believe most of you have offered to do so, so I think that is wonderful. We will put a video of this event online. I look forward to continuing to work with you to make sure that we can open up our European institutions, make our European democracy more collaborative and transparent and accountable as a result. And I wanted to thank you very much for being here this afternoon.
Thank you.